The low hum of the airplane filled the cabin, occasionally punctuated by the soft ding of overhead announcements. The American Airlines Flight 567 had been cruising smoothly for about an hour, heading towards Los Angeles. In seat 38A, a window seat, 9-year-old Jordan Williams gazed out at the clouds, captivated by their fluffy forms. This was his first time flying solo, and despite his mother's countless reassurances that everything would be fine, a small knot of nervousness still twisted in his stomach. Yet it wasn't really fear, more like a thrill. He perched his small hands on the tray table, swinging his legs slightly while he waited for the flight attendants to bring drinks. His mother had told him he could ask for anything non-alcoholic, and he had already made up his mind. Just a simple cup of water would do. As the beverage cart rolled down the aisle, he noticed Emily Carter, a middle-aged flight attendant with short blonde hair, expertly maneuvering her way through the narrow space. Her sharp gaze swept from passenger to passenger, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jordan watched her as she served the people ahead of him, pouring soda into plastic cups and handing out pretzels with the practiced efficiency of someone with countless flights under her belt. Finally, she arrived at Jordan's row. He offered a polite smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Can I have a cup of water, please?" Emily barely acknowledged him. Instead of reaching for a cup, she let out a sharp exhale, almost as if she'd grown tired already. "We're only serving water with the full drink service," she replied curtly, not bothering to meet his eyes. "Right. Now I'm handling sodas and juices." Jordan blinked, puzzled. He had seen her pour water for the passengers just before him. Maybe she hadn't heard him correctly. "Oh, but I just want water," he repeated politely. This time, Emily's lips pressed together tightly. She grabbed a can of Sprite from the cart and placed it on the tray of the passenger beside him. Then she turned back to Jordan, her voice turning icy. "I said, not now," she snapped. The chill in her tone made Jordan shrink back into his seat. His ears felt hot. He knew arguing with an adult was unwise, yet this didn't feel right. Before he could gather his thoughts, Emily fixed him with a hard stare. "You need to wait like everyone else," she said flatly, pushing the cart forward without another word. Jordan sat there frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He had watched her give water to others. Why had she denied him? A few seats away, Lisa Reynolds, a well-dressed woman in her late 30s, had witnessed the entire exchange. Trained as a lawyer, she recognized unfairness when she saw it, and something about the moment gave her pause. She leaned into the aisle, keen eyes following Emily as she moved down the cabin, serving other passengers. Finally, Lisa decided to speak. "Excuse me, miss," she called out. Emily halted, her body tensing as she turned. "Yes?" she replied, maintaining a professional tone that barely concealed her irritation. Lisa pointed towards Jordan. "I noticed you served water to other people before reaching this row, but when this child asked, you said no. Can you explain why that is?" Emily's face remained impassive, yet a defensiveness emerged in her eyes. "As I mentioned earlier," she responded, "we're only distributing water during the full drink service. He'll have to wait." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "That seems unusual. I clearly saw you serving water a few rows ahead. Why the change?" Nearby passengers began to take notice, their heads subtly shifting towards the unfolding confrontation. An older gentleman seated across the aisle frowned at the situation. The tension was palpable, and Jordan squirmed in his seat, wishing he could just vanish. He hadn't intended to stir up trouble. He simply wanted some water. Lisa stood her ground. "I've flown enough times to know that it's not standard policy to deny a child a cup of water. So, I'll ask you again. Why?" Emily's jaw clenched. "I don't appreciate being interrogated. If the boy wants water, he can wait like everyone else." Lisa crossed her arms defiantly. "Yet everyone else seems to be receiving water without issue." Emily's nostrils flared, and she abruptly grabbed the cart and turned away. "I have other passengers to serve," she shot back over her shoulder. Jordan felt a tightness in his chest. It was no longer just about the water, it was the way she had treated him, as though he didn't matter at all. Lisa took a steadying breath, her mind racing. This was discrimination, plain and simple. She recognized it from numerous previous encounters, whether in courtrooms or boardrooms, in policies cloaked in neutrality designed to harm individuals like Jordan. Turning to the young flight attendant lingering near the galley, Daniel Brooks, who had been watching the scene with discomfort, she stated firmly, "Excuse me, I'd like to speak to the crew supervisor." Daniel hesitated, his gaze darting between Emily and Lisa. He understood that what had happened was wrong, yet Emily's seniority made him wary of challenging her. However, something in Lisa's determined demeanor urged him not to let this go. I'll notify the lead. Flight attendant, Daniel said uncertainly. Good, Lisa replied, settling back in her seat, because I'm not going to let this slide. Whispers of concern spread among the other passengers. Some passengers appeared visibly uncomfortable while others wore expressions of anger. The man in the tailored suit shook his head in disapproval. Lisa turned to Jordan, offering him a warm, reassuring smile. You did nothing wrong, sweetheart, she said gently. Some people believe they can treat others unfairly and get away with it, but not today. Jordan swallowed hard and nodded, though inside a whirlwind of emotions churned. Embarrassment, confusion, and a simmering frustration. The mood in the cabin had shifted dramatically. What began as a routine flight was turning into a quiet storm of tension, palpable enough that even those who hadn't witnessed the incident could sense it. Lisa sat with her arms crossed, her mind racing. She understood how these situations typically unfolded. If no one took a stand, it would be swept under the rug and dismissed as a mere misunderstanding. She refused to allow that to happen. Jordan, still seated in 22A, stared down at his hands, his fingers tapping nervously on the tray table. He grappled with the emotions swirling inside him, the tightness in his throat and the heat in his cheeks. Across the aisle, an older man in a gray suit leaned toward Lisa, speaking in a low tone. You were right to call her out, he said. I noticed it too. That woman offered water to at least 3 others before skipping the boy. Lisa nodded, her lips pressed into a determined line. And that's exactly why I'm not letting it slide. Just then, Daniel Brooks, the young flight attendant Lisa had spoken with earlier, returned. He knelt beside her row, his voice barely above a whisper. I spoke to the lead flight attendant, he said, looking around cautiously. She'll notify the captain. Lisa raised an eyebrow. The captain? Daniel hesitated before continuing. Emily is a senior crew member. If this escalates into a formal complaint, it will involve more than just the cabin crew. The airline claims to take these matters seriously, at least on paper. Lisa remained skeptical. Airlines often buried incidents like this. But at least, a chain of accountability was beginning to form. As Daniel stood to leave, he paused, leaning in slightly toward Lisa for a moment. His next words were almost a whisper. This isn't the first time, he confessed. Lisa's expression hardened. What do you mean? He glanced toward the front of the plane where Emily was still busily working. She's had complaints before, he murmured. But nothing official sticks. She's been here for years and knows how to protect herself. A wave of anger surged through Lisa. So they cover for her, she muttered. Daniel swallowed hard. It's complicated, he replied. Not as complicated as it seems. As Daniel walked away, Lisa noticed passengers exchanging furtive glances and whispering quietly among themselves. The witnesses to the incident were still grappling with the discomfort, as heavy as lead. And then, someone chose to take action. The recording begins. A few rows ahead, in seat 17C, a young man in his 20s, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, pulls out his phone. His name is Ethan Park, a tech-savvy college student who's well aware of how stories like this unfold in the media. He's witnessed too many incidents of discrimination that only make headlines when there's video evidence. Tapping his camera, he adjusts the angle discreetly and hits record. On his screen, Emily moves through the aisle, her expression sharp, entirely unmoved by the tension she's ignited. Ethan zooms in slightly, steadying his hand. Uncertain of what might happen next, he's ready to capture it all as the confrontation unfolds. Lisa turns to Jordan. "Sweetheart, do you have a bottle of water in your bag?" she asks gently. Jordan shakes his head. "Mom said I could ask for one on the plane." Lisa's jaw tightens. That settles it. She presses the call button above their seats. A soft chime rings out, and within moments, Emily returns to their row, her face reflecting impatience. "Yes?" she says flatly. Lisa locks eyes with her. "I would like a cup of water for this child," she states, her tone calm yet firm. "Right now." Emily exhales sharply, annoyance evident in her posture. "I told you, we're not serving water until the full drink service." Lisa tilts her head slightly. "Then why did you serve it to other passengers?" Emily's jaw tightens. She glances around, searching for support, but all she finds are watchful eyes. "Passengers are listening. I don't have to explain our procedures to you," she snaps. Lisa leans forward slightly. "Oh, but you do. Because denying a child water when you've given it to others? That's not policy. That's personal." Jordan stiffens in his seat, his heart racing. He feels the weight of every gaze in the cabin. Emily folds her arms, standing her ground. "If you have a problem, file a complaint after we land." Lisa's smile is cold. "I will, and so will half this cabin." She gestures around. Emily's gaze flits nervously across the rows. It's clear now. People are watching her, emotions ranging from disapproval to quiet anger. And then, she sees it. The phone. Emily's face pales slightly as her eyes land on Ethan Park's phone, aimed squarely at her. "You're recording this?" she asks sharply. Ethan doesn't even flinch. "Absolutely," he replied. Emily's expression soured. "That's not supposed to happen." Ethan shot her a grin. "Actually, it is. We're in a public space. I'm just recording a flight attendant denying a child a glass of water for no valid reason. I'm sure the airline will love the extra attention," he added, and Lisa had to stifle a giggle. This kid was quick on his feet. Emily's nostrils flared. In frustration, but she realized she was caught in a tough spot. With half the plane observing and a camera focused on her, lashing out was not an option. For the first time, uncertainty entered her gaze. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and without a word she snatched a plastic cup, filled it from a bottle, and slammed it down on Jordan's tray table. Jordan jumped a little at the sudden motion, eyes wide as he stared at the cup. Emily turned sharply and walked away, her mood as stormy as her expression. For a moment, the row fell quiet. "Everything all right, kid?" Ethan asked Jordan, lowering his phone. Jordan nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the cup. Lisa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You handled that like a pro." Jordan swallowed hard. "I just wanted some water." Lisa's gaze softened. "And you deserved it." Nearby, passengers began to nod in agreement. A few murmured words floated around like disgusting behavior and "she needs to be reported." Ethan turned to Lisa. "I'm going to post this," he declared. Lisa nodded firmly. "Yes, we need to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." As Ethan tapped on the screen to upload the video, the first wave had begun. The world was about to witness what unfolded on Flight AA-265. Ethan Park hit Upload. In less than a minute, the video began to circulate. The airplane's Wi-Fi was patchy, but it worked just enough. Almost immediately, passengers started sharing it. Some sent it to friends, while others took to Twitter to voice their outrage. And then Ethan's phone buzzed with the first notification. Curer, views. Suddenly, it jumped to 1,200. Then came 3,000. Lisa, sitting beside Jordan, watched as Ethan's phone exploded with comments and retweets. People were already furious, calling out the airline for condoning such treatment. "This is appalling. A 9-year-old asks for water and is treated like dirt? She should be fired. Boycott American Airlines. I'm not joking. Lisa turned to Daniel Brooks, the young flight attendant who had tried to assist earlier. His face was pale, his hands gripping the beverage cart as if it were a lifeline. Lisa didn't have to ask to know what he had seen. You noticed it, didn't you? She murmured softly. Daniel swallowed hard, nodding in response. She's in trouble, he whispered. Lisa leaned in closer. Is that a bad thing? She asked. Daniel hesitated, caught between loyalty and the unfolding crisis. Flight attendants were taught to stick together, but this situation had escalated beyond just the crew. I need to inform the captain, he finally said, and Lisa gave a resolute nod. Do it, before this spirals further. Emily can feel the tension. Up front, Emily Carter was starting to sweat. Passengers were watching her now, not just those who had witnessed the earlier incident, but others who had caught snippets of the rumor through hushed voices and social media chatter. She sensed the shift. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She had become the antagonist of Flight AA-265. Though she tried to maintain a composed demeanor, her fingers quivered slightly as she poured a drink for a business-class passenger. "Ma'am!" a voice called out. Emily turned and froze. It was Daniel Brooks, flanked by Maria Vasquez, the lead flight attendant, whose sharp features seemed to cut through the cabin's tension. "The captain needs to speak with you," Maria said, her tone icy. Emily's stomach twisted at the seriousness of the situation. "About what?" she asked, masking her anxiety with feigned ignorance. "Come with us," Maria directed, her expression unyielding. The captain was stepping in. As they approached the galley near the cockpit, Captain Robert Mitchell was waiting. In his 50s and with decades of experience under his belt, the frustration on his face was unmistakable. He wasted no time getting to the point. "Emily," he started, his voice authoritative, "what on earth happened back there?" Folding her arms, Emily replied, "I don't know what you've heard, but this is being exaggerated." The captain pulled out his phone. Someone had already sent him the video. He pressed play. Emily watched herself refusing water to Jordan, witnessed Lisa's confrontation, and saw the coldness etched on her own face. Her stomach clenched as Captain Mitchell fixed his gaze on her. "You think this is exaggerated?" he challenged. Emily clenched her jaw in frustration. "I was following procedure," she insisted. "That's nonsense," Captain Mitchell interrupted sharply. "I don't know what games you think you're playing, but this is a public relations nightmare. Do you realize this is already trending? People are tagging the airline in thousands of posts, demanding your termination." Maria's arms were crossed, her expression showing just how serious the situation had become. Emily's heart raced. They can't fire me over this." Maria let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, they can. And trust me, they will." The walls seemed to close in on Emily. "This is just social media outrage. It'll blow over." Captain Mitchell shook his head. "You're missing the point. This won't just vanish." He let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples. "The airline will expect a statement from us before we even land." Emily went pale, feeling the weight of the cabin's disappointment. In the main cabin, Jordan remained silent in his seat, his water cup still full. Lisa picked up on it. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Jordan hesitated. "I just don't want people to be upset because of me." Lisa felt a twinge of pain in her heart. She leaned closer, her tone soft yet reassuring. "No one is upset. With you," she said firmly. "People are upset for you." Jordan blinked in surprise. "Because it wasn't right." Lisa nodded in agreement. "Exactly." He pondered her words for a moment. The unfairness began to become clearer to him. Across the aisle, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, surprised to see the video had reached 50,000 views. He let out a low whistle. This is really picking up steam. Then something unexpected occurred. A passenger in first class stood up. A tall, well-dressed black man, probably in his 40s, strode purposefully down the aisle until he reached Jordan's row. Lisa recognized him immediately. David Green, a journalist for a major news outlet. "Excuse me," David said, looking directly at Lisa. "I saw the video and I'd like to hear this young man's story." Jordan's eyes widened. "Me?" David nodded. "If you're comfortable with that." Lisa beamed. "Jordan, this is what it means to stand up for yourself." Jordan hesitated before finally nodding quietly but firmly. In that moment, the story of Flight AA-265 transitioned from mere online outrage to a potential national headline. Meanwhile, Emily's fate was being decided. Near the cockpit, Emily Carter sat in silence as the captain made the call to the airline's corporate office. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the decision was reached. "Emily," Captain Mitchell said as he hung up, his voice devoid of warmth. Emily's heart raced as the words sank in. "Done. The airline has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately upon landing," he said flatly, avoiding eye contact. "They don't want you near the passengers or the crew." A sinking feeling enveloped her as he stated she would surrender her badge upon arrival at LAX. Maria Vasquez nearby only smirked, her satisfaction cutting deeper than any reprimand. For the first time in her career, Emily Carter felt utterly powerless. She realized at the instant Flight AA-265 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport. A tense silence gripped the cabin. Passengers who had spent hours exchanging whispers, taking videos, and scrolling through social media sat alert, their anticipation palpable. They understood what awaited them just as Emily did. Seated at the front? She remained frozen in her seat, drained of color. Since the captain delivered the grim news, she had barely uttered a word. Her hands were knotted so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Maria Vasquez, the lead flight attendant, unfastened her seatbelt and directed her gaze at Emily. "You'll be the last to disembark. Security will meet you at the gate." The mention of security sent a shockwave through Emily. The humiliation was unbearable. She swallowed hard, eyes fixed ahead as the familiar landing announcement echoed in the cabin. "Ding! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. The local time is 5:42 p.m. The usual welcome fell on deaf ears. Passengers were already reaching for their phones, scrolling through Twitter, and diving into the comment sections of viral posts. The world was watching, waiting for the spectacle of her downfall. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, Lisa leaned towards Jordan. "Ready, sweetheart?" Jordan nodded, anxiety knotting his stomach as he gripped his backpack strap tightly. The weight of countless eyes pressing upon him was suffocating. Whispers circled amongst the passengers, some casting glares of disdain as they filed past Emily's row. Lisa guided Jordan into the aisle, and just as they made their way forward, a voice called out, "Hey, kid!" Jordan turned to see Ethan Park, the college student who had recorded the entire event. With a grin, Ethan raised his phone. "You're famous now." Jordan blinked in disbelief. "Hey, I don't know if I want that kind of fame." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. We'll get through this together." Together they stepped onto the jet bridge, greeted by a storm of flashing cameras, the whirlwind of media frenzy awaiting them. Lisa barely had a moment to collect herself before reporters swarmed. Jordan, can we get a comment? Lisa Reynolds, is it true you're pursuing legal action against the airline? Do you believe American Airlines has a racism issue?" Jordan stood frozen, his grip on Lisa's hand tightening. Without hesitation, Lisa moved to shield him from the reporter's frenzy. "Enough," she asserted with conviction. "He's just a child." A reporter pressed a microphone closer to her. "Lisa, as a civil rights attorney, what steps do you think should be taken next?" Lisa took a moment to gather her thoughts. "What occurred today should never have taken place," she stated firmly. "But the fact that it was captured on film and that people rallied to support Jordan, that's significant. It shows that people are finally paying attention." Jordan gazed up at her, his little fingers tightening in response. Lisa squeezed his hand reassuringly. He wasn't alone. Inside the plane, Emily Carter was facing the consequences of her actions. She was the last person still on board. Passengers shot her glares, and many muttered hurtful remarks as they passed by. One woman even whispered, "Shame on you." Now, seated rigidly in her seat, Emily felt a chill as a uniformed airline security officer entered the cabin. "Emily Carter," he said, prompting her to swallow hard. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer presented a clipboard. "You need to sign this. It's an acknowledgement of your immediate termination." Emily's stomach clenched. I didn't do anything wrong," she stuttered, desperation creeping into her voice. "It was a misunderstanding." Maria Vasquez snorted from the back. "Oh, please, you did this to yourself." Emily felt a wave of panic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be happening. But as she shook with fear, she picked up the pen and signed her name. Once she finished, the officer motioned toward the jet bridge. "Let's go." Emily rose to her feet, humiliation flooding her as she walked toward the exit. The moment she stepped off the plane, blinding lights flashed in her eyes. Journalists had gathered, ready for questions. "Emily, do you want to comment on your actions? Are you remorseful for what you did? Did the airline force you to resign?" With her head bowed, Emily pushed through the crowd, her face burning from shame as she tried to block out the barrage of inquiries. Her career, it felt, was over. The airline's damage control kicked in just minutes later as American Airlines released a public statement. "We acknowledge an incident that occurred on flight AA265. The behavior displayed is not in line with our values. The employee involved has been terminated, and we are reviewing our internal policies to prevent any future incidents like this." But it wasn't enough. Twitter erupted into a frenzy. The justice for Jordan was trending. So, the hashtag Boycott American Airlines took off. Major news outlets were on it within the hour. Jordan, a once quiet 9-year-old thrilled about a trip, had suddenly become the face of a nationwide discussion on racial discrimination. After the chaos settled, he finally arrived at his grandmother's house, and she wrapped him in a warm embrace. "Oh, baby, I saw everything," she whispered. Jordan looked up, feeling unsure. "I didn't think it was a big deal at first." His grandmother gently cupped his cheek. "That's how they get you, honey. They make you believe it's nothing, so you let it slide." Jordan pondered her words, realizing how close he had come to staying silent. Then he asked something that made Lisa pause. "Grandma, has this happened to you?" His grandmother's smile dimmed a bit. She nodded. "Oh, sweetheart, more times than I can count." In that moment, Jordan felt a shift within him, a new understanding awakening. He had always viewed the world as fair, assuming adults acted with integrity. But now, he comprehended a harsher truth. Lisa knelt down to him. "You stood up for yourself, Jordan! And now, a lot of people are paying attention because of you." He swallowed hard, absorbing her words. Finally, he nodded. "I'm glad they know." Lisa smiled. "Me too." For the first time since the incident on the plane, Jordan felt a surge of pride. A week later, everything had changed. Life wasn't quite back to normal. He was still just a 9-year-old boy, but now people recognized his name. His mother's. Phone rang continuously with calls from reporters, activists, and even celebrities wanting to lend their support. His story had spread across platforms like CNN and the New York Times, making its way to late-night talk shows as well. Opinions clashed online. Some hailed it as a wake-up call, while others dismissed it as an overreaction. But Jordan was unfazed by the chatter. He just wanted to comprehend the reasons behind it all. Sitting on his grandmother's porch, the sun sinking behind the trees, he finally mustered the courage to ask. "Grandma?" She swayed gently in her chair. "Yes, baby?" Jordan hesitated for a moment. Why do people do things like that? His grandmother sighed. folding her hands in her lap. "Because they think they can," she replied simply. "Because for a long time, nobody stopped them." He thought about that, about Emily Carter, and the confidence she had exuded, until it all crumbled. His fingers traced the porch railing as he asked, "Do you think she's sorry?" His grandmother regarded him carefully. "Do you?" Jordan thought about it. "No." He finally confessed. His grandmother nodded in understanding. "Then you already know what to do." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Lisa Reynolds was just getting started. Settled in a modern office building, she faced a panel of airline executives from American Airlines. They had asked for this meeting, eager to smooth over their recent blunders, but Lisa had no interest in empty corporate gestures. "I don't want your press releases," she stated firmly. "I need to hear what real changes you'll implement." The executives exchanged concerned glances. "We're performing an internal review," one of them said cautiously. Lisa's expression hardened. "That isn't sufficient." She leaned in. "You were aware of Emily Carter? You had received complaints about her long before this incident. Yet you allowed her to remain in her position until the situation exploded." The executives shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. "You want all of this to disappear?" Lisa pressed, her tone cutting. "Then rectify the system that permitted this behavior to persist in the first place." A heavy quiet gripped the room. Finally, one of the senior executives, a woman in a navy suit, cleared her throat. "We're willing to fund diversity and sensitivity training." Lisa interrupted her. "And who will oversee that? You? People like you." The woman hesitated. Lisa crossed her arms defiantly. "I demand an independent committee, genuine oversight. I also want Jordan's family to be part of those discussions." Another moment of silence hung in the air. "We'll consider it," the executive finally replied. Lisa's smile was icy. "No, you'll implement it." The executives knew they had no choice. The eyes of the public were upon them, and Lisa Reynolds held the weight of national scrutiny on her side. After a lengthy pause, the woman in the navy suit nodded in acknowledgement. Lisa leaned back, a wave of satisfaction washing over her. Change was on the horizon. Emily's final reckoning was imminent. Meanwhile, Emily Carter's life had unraveled. She was fired, disgraced, unemployable in the airline sector. Once her name made headlines, her history of complaints resurfaced. Former passengers stepped forward, along with ex-coworkers who had witnessed her conduct firsthand. Now she sat in a cramped apartment, mindlessly scrolling through articles that no longer shocked her. Fired flight attendant accused of a troubling pattern of discrimination. Ex-coworkers are speaking out, insisting that Emily Carter should have been dismissed long ago. Following a viral incident, American Airlines has vowed to implement reforms. She placed her phone down and gazed blankly at the wall. In that moment, her entire career slipped away. The hardest truth was that she had brought this upon herself, a lesson learned the hard way for Jordan. Meanwhile, back at his grandmother's house, Jordan sat at the kitchen table, doodling in his notebook. This time, he wasn't sketching superheroes. Instead, he captured an image of himself, reflecting on how he felt that day on the plane, seated in 22A. His gaze fixed on the cup of water he had desperately tried to obtain. His grandmother caught a glimpse of the drawing. "That's a strong boy you've sketched," she noted. Jordan offered a soft smile. "Yeah, I think so too." He set his pencil down and met her gaze. "I don't want this to happen to anyone else," he admitted quietly. His grandmother reached out and held his hand. "You stood up, sweetheart." Because of that, the world witnessed the truth. Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "But what if it happens again?" His grandmother smiled gently. "Then I hope the next kid has someone like Lisa Reynolds nearby." As he considered her words, for the first time since that flight, Jordan felt something lighter than before. It wasn't quite happiness, but it was something closer to hope. 2 weeks later, American Airlines organized a press conference. During the announcement, they unveiled a new oversight committee for discrimination cases and promised to review all prior complaints made against employees. They also issued a formal apology to Jordan and his family. It wasn't perfect justice, but it felt like a positive beginning. As Lisa watched the press conference unfold from her office, she picked up her phone and texted Jordan's mother. "Please let Jordan know that he made a difference." Moments later, her phone buzzed with a response. Jordan says thank you and that he wants to become a lawyer when he grows up. A smile spread across Lisa's face. Maybe, just maybe, the world was beginning to change after all.